There are thousands of bad ideas. There's no such thing as a good idea. Only way to know is to take ideas and collide them with the real world.
Marc Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix, shares how a simple concept changed the way the world watches TV.
One day I pitched a different idea. I said, okay, Reed, video rental by mail. Back in 1997, a video came on those big VHS cassettes. They were big, heavy, and expensive. So that idea out the window. And then Reed stops me and goes, wait. I read about something last night. It's called a DVD. We can ship movies back and forth for the price of a stamp. On April of 1998, we launched Netflix.
The cheapest Valentine's date is old Netflix and chill.
Yeah.
You've all heard the phrase Netflix and chill.
When did you first hear the cultural term Netflix and chill?
Netflix and chill, that is the most surprising outcome. You become a euphemism for getting laid. You know you've done something right.
There's a lot of rapid change going on. How do these big organizations take on this philosophy that you've got here with Netflix?
It's going to be very, very hard for them. And the fact that large companies get so paralyzed, that's great news for me. That's what makes them vulnerable. You know, I'll give you a quick analogy here.
Just before we get into today's episode, we have a favor to ask you, and that is, can you please hit that subscribe button? It's somewhere there on the screen for you. It's very easy, and it means so much to us as creators.
This allows us to keep raising the bar on the guests that we bring you guys every week and build our community even bigger. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into today's episode.
Marc, to start off this conversation, we wanted to explain to our audience, first of all, you don't need to do this. You don't need to appear on this podcast. And second of all, I think this goes to show who you are as a person, but you were emailing us directly from your personal email address, bouncing backwards and forwards to try and find a time to make this podcast episode happen. You're Marc Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix. I think there's something in that is really special. So I guess my first question to you is, what is your purpose to be here today?
Well, it is a couple of things. First of all, I'm a complete sucker for Australian media and Australians in general and Australian as a country. So I'm always happy to do what I can to help out people on that side of the world. So that's a silly one. The other one, it goes to a deeper purpose, which is I kind of had this revelation a bunch of years ago. And if you have a second, can I tell a bit longer of a story?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I will apologize. This is going to be one of the most obnoxious starts to a story ever. And it's going to completely cut against the impression they may have gotten about this guy who answers his own emails and schedules his own meetings. So anyway, I was scheduled to go and my wife and I were going to go spend a week with Richard Branson on one of his private islands. Mm-hmm. And that's the obnoxious part. I told my wife, I can't go. I was invited to go and I can't go. We're going mountain biking with some friends. And as soon as she heard that I was turning this down, well, pretty quickly that got reversed, and all of a sudden we were buying sunscreen and stuff. But the gist of the reason why I was going to this island was that Richard Branson was as a nonprofit, and he was going to be offering up the island to another nonprofit to run a conference. And the conference happened to be for a Australian women's business organization. And it was called Business Chicks, which is a very classic Australian name for an organization. But the whole theme of it was these people who were very successful women entrepreneurs. They'd really achieved the pinnacle of success and were kind of saying, what next? And this conference was about really, what's next? What do you do with your life when you've achieved all the things you wanted to achieve? And they wanted me to come speak because one of the things I'm good at is talking about how to take your dreams and make them real. And I said, okay, this is not a big deal. I'm not sure I want to hang out with a bunch of Australian ladies. But listen, we'll go. I'll do my 1 hour talk and then we'll go hang out at the beach. So we all show up at Necker Island, and I do my speech, and then I go, I'm going to hang out and see what this whole finding your purpose thing is all about. And I was transfixed. It was like they were talking to me. And I ended up attending the whole session, didn't even go to the beach, ended up becoming really, really good friends with a whole tremendous number of Australian women, which is one of the reasons I spend so much time in Australia now. But the point is, I realized that they were talking to me, that I was at this point in my life where I could go and do a speech and I'd get 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people to show up and hear me speak. But what was I trying to say? What was I trying to do? And I kind of realized that this kind of was my purpose, was to try and help people take their ideas and make them real. And that has become this driving purpose. And it's why I wrote the book. It's why I wrote That Will Never Work. It's why I do the keynote speaking I do. It's why I did a blog. It's why I did a podcast. And as the longest answer ever for a very simple question, it's why I'm here with you today, is because any opportunity I have to really try and help people hopefully get even a teeny bit of some of the enjoyment out of being an entrepreneur, of starting something that I did. Well, then I've taken one smaller incremental step toward what my whole purpose in life is right now.
Marc, you were an entrepreneur before entrepreneurship was popular, before movies came out, before there were books, before there were podcasts about being an entrepreneur. Take us through those early stages for you and what attracted you to entrepreneurship.
Well, you're right. I started doing this a long time ago. I mean, I became, I guess, my first real entrepreneurial thing happened when I was in my, early 20s. So that was at this point 50 years ago. But I was drawn to it, when I was a little teeny kid. And when I say drawn to it, I don't mean drawn to this. Be an entrepreneur. You get to pitch and you get to go to parties and you get to be famous and powerful. I mean, this compulsion to want to solve problems, to see a hole and have to fill it. And even, one of my very, very first jobs was when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. It was selling seeds, like vegetable seeds or flower seeds, door to door. And it was absolutely some form of child labor exploitation, because you might sell 1,000 packets of seeds and you get a whistle or you get a little cheap compass. But most kids, I'm sure, go and knock on the door. Someone comes and says, "What do you want?" And they run away terrified. And for some reason, I found that whole process of doing door-to-door sales fascinating. Like, I kept trying to figure out, well, what should I wear something different? What do I say when they open the door? Should I try something else? Oh, they bought one. What can I say to get them to buy another? It was this problem-solving thing that intrigued me for some irrational reason, and that never stopped. And so I was always the person who was doing something like that. There's no club, I'll start that club. Oh, I'll put a play, I'll put on the play. I'll start this magazine. All things I did in university. And so that finally, when I was out in the real world doing these starting companies, I'd been doing it sort of for a long, long time before that. So I was drawn to being an entrepreneur before entrepreneurship was cool. And how strange it is to even say that we've gotten to a point where in some ways, I guess entrepreneurship is cool now.
Marc, if someone listening to this wants to jump into that space, become an entrepreneur, what are your top tips?
Well, by far, the single biggest tip is, if you want to be an entrepreneur, is just do it. There is nothing stopping you. And I'm quite sincere. I am now fortunate enough that I have heard every single possible excuse for why people don't take this idea or this desire to be an entrepreneur and don't do it. I have to graduate school. I have to quit my job. I have to raise money. I have to find a co-founder. I have to get a degree in computer science. I mean, I've heard a million of them. And what I've learned after 50 years of being an entrepreneur and after coaching hundreds, if not thousands of people, is that taking that first step It is extremely easy as long as you have the courage to just do something without knowing in advance what's going to happen. But I'm not saying starting a company means you drop out of school, you try and raise money, you hire all these people. No, it means you see a hole, well, try and fill it. And don't do something small. If you're in grade school, if you're 14 years old, so start something, sell something, set up a stand at school and sell something. Get a get a Shopify and sell something. Get a YouTube and sell something. Those things, the barriers to starting are minuscule. They cost nothing. And you begin to gain, and if at school, start a club, put on a show, do a magazine. Those things are where you learn the basic building blocks of entrepreneurship. You learn how to sell. You learn how to convince people to help you when you can't afford to pay them. You learn how to ask for resources, to ask for the room you're going to operate in, to ask for permission to set up a stand in the cafeteria. All those things seem trivial because you're doing them at this small scale, but you learn by screwing up and screwing up at a small scale. So little by little, you get better and better at it. Do not think you have to do a big, full Silicon Valley startup. It just isn't required. You take a small step first.
Take us back to the first time that you met Reed Hastings and that relationship for the both of you and how you two worked together so well throughout your career.
So I met Reed just kind of randomly because Reed purchased the startup that I was, my previous startup. It was myself and two other co-founders, and we were laboring in very happy obscurity. And all of a sudden, Reed's company, a big company called Pure Atria Software, acquired us. And boom, I went from this very cerebral job as kind of thinking about the marketing and strategy for a product that hadn't even launched yet. And boom, all of a sudden I'm running marketing for this big, massive multinational corporation. But the big plus here is that in most of my team ended up in offices in the basement being a business unit. I was going to work directly for Reed. So I got to know him pretty well that way. But the real bonus is it turned out that Reed and I lived in the same town. So we also began carpooling back and forth to work together. And became good friends that way. And more importantly, kind of began to realize that we both had very, very complementary skills. He's very, very analytical. He's a mathematician. He's a computer scientist. I'm very creative. I'm very emotional. I came up on the marketing side. But we also realized, despite these big differences in temperament and background and skills, that we shared some very, very fundamental things, which is both of us were brutally honest. Both of us did not believe in shading the truth. We said what we thought, and it enabled us to have these amazing arguments where it wasn't about proving you were right. It was about getting to the obviously correct answer. And that once you arrived at it, you almost instantly forgot whose idea it might have been or who was pro and who was con. And it turns out those combinations of things were really, really important factors when only 6 months later, our bigger company was acquired and both Reed and I lost our jobs. They already had a CEO and they already had a senior VP of marketing and decided, well, let's do a company together. And that little company we decided to do together ended up being Netflix.
Back to those early days of Netflix, you and Reed, how did you come up with that idea? And how did you know it was a good idea?
So as I mentioned, when Reed and I met, we were carpooling together. We were driving back and forth to the office every day. And then when all of a sudden we sold this company to another big company, we're out of jobs, it was interesting. well, we have to wait now for this deal to close, which might take months, but there wasn't a lot for us to do. And I said, this is perfect. I'm going to start my next company. This would have been number 6. Reed didn't want to start another company. He was going to go back to school. He was going to get a higher degree in education. He was going to change the world as a philanthropist. And he wanted to keep a hand in as an entrepreneur, although not an active role. So we came to an agreement that he would be my angel investor. He would be the chair of the board. I would start and run the company. But we were missing a little thing called, well, what is this company going to do? We
Yeah.
yeah. And listen, contrary to popular belief, ideas don't spring out of thin air like in some mythical eureka moment. There's no epiphany where it springs forth suddenly clear. We were looking for ideas. And despite the fact that Netflix became a movie company, it isn't like Reed and I were movie buffs. We didn't spend this commute debating who the best French cinematographers were or something. We had little kids. We just ended up watching Disney movies all the time. So very pedestrian tastes in movies. But we did have some criteria, and we had a process. That's the important thing. And the process was, I'll tell you what the process was. So every morning, Reed would drive by my house. He'd come in, pick me up in the car. And before we'd even left my drive, I'd be ready for him. And I go, okay, Reed, I've got one for you. Personalized shampoo. People are going to cut off a lock of their hair. They're going to mail it to us. We're going to have a team of ace hair scientists who formulate a custom blend just for them, and they'll subscribe to it. And Reed wouldn't even say anything. He'd just be staring out the window, like he hadn't even driving, like he hadn't even heard me. But I knew that behind that empty gaze, the wheels were turning, and he was calculating risks and rewards and costs and opportunities and all that. And it may take 3 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe even longer, but eventually he'd go, that will never work. And he'd lay into me with all the reasons it was a bad idea. And I'd come right back at him with all the things I'd thought of it, why it was a good idea. And we'd argue all the way to work. If we needed to, we'd argue all the way home. And we did that day after day. And I genuinely pitched him personalized shampoo. I pitched him custom dog food. I pitched him personalized sporting goods. I pitched vitamins. And then one day I pitched him a different idea. I said, okay, Reed, picture this. Video rental by mail. People are going to come to our website. They're going to pick out a movie. We're going to mail it to them. They're going to keep it for a week, and they're going to mail it back. And that was also a stupid idea. This was in 1997. Back in 1997, as you may remember, video came on those big VHS cassettes. They were big, heavy, and expensive. So that idea out the window. And then maybe a month later, I get warmed up, ready to pitch my next idea. And Reed stops me and goes, wait. I read about something last night. Really cool. It's called a DVD. It's this little silver disc, about this big, holds a movie. And we began debating in the car whether this new technology might be enough to re-energize that old video rental by mail idea I pitched him a month ago. And then we did the thing that was just quintessentially entrepreneurial. So we didn't go to the office and put together a business plan or, go home and do a pitch deck and try and get on Shark Tank or something. We turned the car around in the middle of the commute, went back into town where we lived to try and buy a DVD and couldn't find one, just in test market then. So settled for buying a used music CD, same size, same shape, then bought a little envelope like he'd put a greeting card in and put the CD in the envelope, addressed it to Reed's house and dropped it in the mail, and then went to work. And the very next morning, when Reed came to pick me up the next day to go to work, he just held up a little envelope with an unbroken CD in it that had gotten to his house in less than 24 hours for the price of a postage stamp. And that made us realize, wow, this just might work. Maybe we can use the post office. We can ship movies back and forth for the price of a stamp. And that was enough. Reed wrote out a check for $2 million. I deposited it in the local bank. I rented a small office. I hired a dozen engineers. We spent 6 months building this rudimentary e-commerce website, the type that, your kids could probably put together in a couple hours. And on April of 1998, we launched that little company now known as Netflix. And amazing what these stupid little ideas can eventually become.
Your resilience to be able to turn up to Reed every day, get in the car, rub your hands together and pitch those ideas and get rejected and get rejected and get rejected. I don't know how many times you got rejected there. How did you overcome that for yourself? Because you are that creative mind. You are that person that wants to go home and think through an idea. How did you overcome that?
So I had, at this point, I was 38 years old. So I'd been doing this for a long time. And I knew the basic rule of entrepreneurship is that you never know. I was very comfortable with the fact that most of my ideas were terrible. I don't know whether, either of you have corporate backgrounds, but
yes,
there's this thing, certainly in the United States, and I spent blissfully little time in corporate America, but this thing called a brainstorming session.
Yeah.
You know what circle of hell that
We
we
know
know it.
We know it
exists
well.
in. But they all start the same way. And the moderator goes, all right, you have some ground rules. And ground rule number 1, there is no such thing as a bad idea. Well, bullshit. There are thousands of bad ideas. In fact, they're all bad ideas. In fact, there's no such thing as a good idea. They're all bad ideas because you can't possibly come up with this fully formed idea by just thinking about it. The only way to know is to take ideas and collide them with the real world in somehow. And I was completely comfortable with the fact that almost everything that I was going to brainstorm was a bad idea. And so what we were searching for was not necessarily the good idea. We were searching for an idea that might be worth taking the next step and beginning the process of trying to figure out if it might be a good idea. And lo and behold, we launched this company. And back then, it was very different. There was no streaming video. If you wanted a movie, it came on a DVD and we mailed it to you. And there was not a lot of business model innovation. There was due dates, there was late fees. And so this idea that everyone said would never work, that, Reed probably said would never work, well, they were all right. It didn't work. It was terrible. But each time we tried an experiment and didn't work, you learn a little bit. And it changes the direction of the next thing you try. And you learn a little bit there. And the next thing you try. So I know that these things, that is the process of being an entrepreneur. It is not you come up with this singular idea. Oh my gosh, we can't make our rent. Let's throw an air mattress down and boom, there's Airbnb. Or we can't get a cab on New Year's and boom, there's Uber. It doesn't work like that. It's this process of starting out with an idea, which is ridiculous, and having the confidence that let's figure out why it's not a bad idea, because maybe, just maybe, we'll iterate our way to something that is a good idea.
Okay, Mark, so you've got this idea, you've started to run with it. How did you guys start testing the service, and what did you guys learn from testing?
Well, it's interesting because I had lots and lots and lots of things I wanted to try. This was an idea that was terrible. It didn't work. And I had a lot of things to try. My problem, if anything, was I was a bit of a perfectionist. We'd do these tests and they'd be kind of works of art. They'd have custom photography and we'd argue over every word of copy. And it would take a month and it wouldn't work. And we'd look at each other kind of sheepishly and realize we just wasted a month. So we'd cut some corners and we'd do a test in 2 weeks and that wouldn't work. And we'd go even faster, do it in a week and then in 2 days. And then pretty soon we were testing something every single day. And stuff's pretty sloppy. We'd have the wrong image, or we'd have the watermark in it, or we'd have misspellings and typos and crash the site and dead links. But there was an amazing insight that came from all that, which is that it didn't make a difference. That if it was a bad idea, even these perfect month-long tests weren't going to make it into a good idea. But if it was even a glimmer of a good idea, that people didn't care about the misspellings and the typos and the dead links and the crash site, they would reboot the computer. They would call us. They'd knock on the door. They would tell us loud and clear we were onto something. And I think that insight actually is probably the single most important insight that we had at Netflix. And I think it transformed the company. And I actually think it's the single thing which has driven Silicon Valley innovation in the last 25 years. And it's probably the single biggest thing which would drive innovation going forward. And it's simply that it's not about having a good idea. That success comes from being willing and having the patience and having the culture and having a system to try as many bad ideas as you can.
Mark, we're in a really interesting time where there's a lot of rapid change going on. And we've got big corporates in the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, who have a lot of staff inside them, and a lot of staff that they've held on for a long period of time. How do these big organizations take on this philosophy that you've got here with Netflix? Because I think that's going to be quite hard for them.
It's going to be very, very hard for them. And it's a combination of necessity and courage. Listen, I'm an entrepreneur. I do startups. I do early stuff. And the fact that large companies get so paralyzed, that's great news for me. That's what makes them vulnerable. Now, it's not such a good story if you are one of those big companies. But, I'll give you a quick analogy here, an example. So I did some work a while ago. This is a manufacturing company, and it made a building product. And they were by far the dominant company in the category. They had a 90% market share, something crazy. And they sold this product through multi-step distribution. So they sold to a distributor sold it to the retail store sold it to the customer. Price gets marked up at each stage. Great system, for years and years, highly profitable. Then another company comes in, not as good of a product, but begins selling direct from the manufacturer to the consumer. And because they've cut out those two distribution steps, they can cut the price dramatically. And it begins to, take away a teeny bit of business. And the CEO of this big company goes, not a problem. With our brand and the quality of our product, we can crush them immediately. So let's set up our own little direct-to-consumer division. Well, that lasts about as long as it takes for the senior VP of sales to hear about it. And he comes in and goes, "What are you doing? What? You're going to compete with our distributors? You're going to compete with ours? You're going to make my job harder? Well, if that's how you're going to do it, I'm out of here." And the sales go, no. And of course, that lasts as long until the distributor hears about it and goes, "We're your biggest distributor. We do 40% of your business. And you're going to compete with me? You're going to undercut my price? Well, you can take your business. I'll take my business elsewhere."
Yeah.
And of course, we'll deal with it later. And of course, those conditions never change. It never gets easier. And eventually, that little company gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon, it's making a big impact, but then it's too late. And that's the story that happens at every large company. You have these systems and these processes, and you are locked into a way of doing business. But I hate to break it to you, your customers could care less about whether your senior VP of sales is happy or not. And your customers could care less about whether your biggest distributor is all upset about your price. All they care is, am I going to get a great product at a great price? And if you're not willing to do the thing that's right for them, they'll be more than happy to find someone who will. And you have to have this courage to do things that may end up being very, very short-term painful. And Netflix, in my opinion, never made that mistake. They always recognized they had to earn people's business every single day, every single week, that it wasn't enough to do what was right for the past customer. You had to be doing what was right for the future customer, even if that meant really compromising your current business.
I remember getting on my mum and dad would send me on a Saturday on my bike to ride down to the Blockbuster video store to go and rent out a DVD. Sometimes I'd get there, the DVD case would be there, but the DVD wasn't behind. It would be disappointing. I'd come home with a DVD that we didn't want, but we'd sit down and watch it anyway. I remember that 30 years ago. And now that business no longer exists. Those physical stores are no longer there. What was that like for you to watch that process on the other side, beginning Netflix and then watching this other business? So, like, was it fast for you to watch that Blockbuster disappear, or like was it slow? Like for me, it feels really fast. It feels like it was there one day, gone the next. But how did it feel for you?
No, it was a. Well, I would not say it was fast. I mean, the first thing I will say is that, the reason that my book is called "That Will Never Work" is because that's what everyone told me. That'll never work. All my employees, my investors, my wife, and they usually had two objections. And the number one objection was Blockbuster. I mean, they have 9,000 stores. They have 60,000 employees. You can, anywhere in the United States, you could throw a rock and you're going to hit a Blockbuster store. Why on earth is anybody going to rent a movie that takes a couple days to get there, when I can just walk down the block and get it myself? And we realized it's not that simple. That, as you said, yes, you could walk down the block to the Blockbuster store, but the video might not be there. It's not organized properly. The movie can only be in one place. You can file it under director or genre or actor or alphabetically, but and they have to pick one. And of course, in a store, online store, you can file it in as many categories as you want. So we knew the bottom line is that for this was that if you're going to compete with somebody, you want to compete with someone that customers don't like. And the fundamental thing is that customers generally did not like the experience of a Blockbuster. They hated the late fees. They hated the fact the availability was spotty. They'd go for a new release and it wouldn't be there. So that was a huge advantage. But it was not easy at all. I mean, it was absurd to think we could ever take down Blockbuster. They were a $6 billion a year company. It took us 3 years to get to $5 million. So, a thousandth the size. The idea that we could ever take that on was just absurd. And it took a long time, and it was by no means certain. There was times when Blockbuster was extremely threatening, existentially threatening to us. They, initially, as we began to get a little bit of traction, they looked at this little video rental by mail business and went, that's kind of interesting. Maybe we should do that too. But they did the exact same thing that the manufacturing company I talked about a moment ago did, is they looked at it and said, well, if we get this right, it'll be less than 1% of our business. So are we going to put our best engineers on it? Are we going to put our best executives on it? No. And so we'll get these people over here to do it. And of course, they did a crappy job and it failed. And Netflix got a little stronger. Oh, we better try again. And after the third or fourth try, as Netflix was truly becoming dangerous, they finally decided they had to do this differently. And they took some of their best engineers and their best executives and said, get out of the building. do this, go after these guys. And they almost took Netflix down. So there was points where not only was I not going, oh, watch them fade into oblivion. I was going, they're going to make us fade into oblivion. So it kind of came closer than you might think. But it was pretty remarkable that eventually, Netflix was able to pass Blockbuster in revenue. Blockbuster eventually did go into bankruptcy, and now that company with 9,000 stores has one left. And, Netflix is Netflix.
It's a monster.
It's global.
Mark, there are two pivotal meetings that happen as well in the lifetime of Netflix, one with Amazon, the team from Amazon, and then also one from Blockbuster. Do you want to take us through those meetings and what you were going through at those times?
Sure. I mean, I'll give it to you. I'll give you the quick version here. But so early on, this is still in probably the first year, we got a call from the CFO at Amazon. And she said, hey, why don't you guys pop up to Seattle? Jeff would love to sit down with you. And we knew exactly what was going on because at the time, this is in 1998, Amazon, believe it or not, only sold books. They were a bookstore. Mm-hmm. And but they had made no secret of the fact that they were eventually going to be the everything store that they are today, and that their next category would be music and video. And so it was pretty clear that what Jeff probably wanted to talk about was whether to buy Netflix to accelerate his entry into video. So Reed and I flew up and got to spend some time with Jeff and had a good talk. And on the way out, the CFO goes, I got to set your expectations that if this happens, the price is probably going to be in the low, 7 figures, maybe the low to 8 figures. And I go, okay, that's probably what, $15 million? And don't get me wrong, $15 million would have been a pretty good payday for about a year's worth of work. I mean, at that point, Reed and I each owned half the companies. So that would have been pretty decent. But Reed and I at that point were right in that point where we thought we'd solved all the big problems. We'd managed to launch a website. We'd managed to get a copy, at least one copy of every single DVD available. We'd set up all these operational things. And we weren't ready to give someone else the keys to the car. And so in some ways, that first trip wasn't so much a decision about whether we should sell the company or not. It was really a commitment ceremony for Reed and I.
Yeah.
We had to look each other in the eye and say, are you in? Are we going to do this?
Yeah. And
then on we went. And of course, realized not soon after, oh my gosh, we definitely have not got this figured out. It took us, in fact, about 2.5 years to quote unquote figure it out. And the breakthrough was when we figured out how to do subscription. Mm-hmm. We had a no due dates, no late fees subscription program. And it was the moment where we had found product market fit. And the company took off. And all of a sudden we are onto it. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with subscription businesses, but they're incredibly powerful because you have this predictive income. You know that someone's going to be on average a subscriber for 2 years. And you go, wow, I'm going to get $20 a month for 2 years. And that's $500 in revenue, whatever the number is. I can probably spend $30 or $40 to acquire that customer, even though in the first month, I'm only going to make $3 or $4 in profit. Which means that if you're incredibly successful, you begin losing money really, really fast. And that was fine in the year 2000, or at least in the spring of 2000, because in the late spring of 2000, the dot-com crash happened. And all of a sudden, there was no more money coming in. It was impossible to raise money. And Netflix was in deep trouble. We were going to go bankrupt being successful. And we tried everything we could to figure out how to right this ship, how to balance it. And we were at a loss. We go, well, it's time to pursue strategic alternatives, which I'm not sure that translates, but that's code for we have got to sell this sucker and sell it fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our obvious strategic alternative was Blockbuster. And as I mentioned before, they were in a very different place. We had $5 million in revenue. They were $6 billion. We had 100 employees. They had 60,000 employees. So nothing. They would not return our calls. They would not respond to emails. We tried to get them to have a meeting with us to try and pitch them on buying us. And finally, a few months later, they eventually called, and we flew from California to Dallas, went up to this massive glass and steel skyscraper to this huge conference room, and sat down, Reed and I and our CFO, Barry McCarthy, and we made our pitch that we would combine the companies, that they'd run the stores, we'd run the online business. And the secret was that we'd build a blended model. We'd make it so that people could either get it by mail or pick it up at the store, or return it by mail or return it at the store. And our research had said, that's the killer. That's the killer app. And it was going great. They were asking good questions and leaning forward until they asked the big question, which is how much. We, of course, had rehearsed this on the plane going over. And we said, $50 million. And let's just say they found that concept rather amusing, that this little company in the process of going bankrupt at the depths of the dot-com meltdown could possibly be worth $50 million. So the meeting went downhill pretty quickly, and it was a long, quiet ride in the plane back to California. And I remember I was so crushed because I was so confident that if we could just get this meeting, that Blockbuster was going to save us. But now Blockbuster wasn't going to save us. They were going to compete with us. And I knew there was no easy way out. We tried for months to figure out the easy way out, that if we were going to do this, it was going to be on us. And so we laid people off. We focused our business. We all took pay cuts, and we scraped through, and it was a tremendously focusing and important time, because it made us realize we can only do the things that are truly important to do. And as I said, eventually we did pass them. Eventually they went bankrupt. They're down to one store. But, more importantly now, Netflix, that company they could have bought for $50 million, has a market cap, and I haven't looked recently, but close to $250 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, you never know.
Mark, that moment where you're on the plane and you're flying back home, I'm sure there's many entrepreneurs that have been in that moment at a different scale and a different level. What are you saying to yourself after that meeting? Like, how are you talking to you? Are you talking to yourself in a positive way? Are you beating yourself up? What are you saying to yourself on that flight?
Oh, Mark, you totally shit the bed here. I genuinely thought this was the biggest failure of my life. I mean, listen, we'd spent months trying to figure out whether there's some way to save the company. We'd spent months trying to get this meeting as the long shot for saving the company. And when they agreed to meet with us, I went, all right, Mark, you have one thing to do. This is the most important thing you're going to do. The fate of Netflix is in your hands. Don't screw this up. And I went in and I failed. We went home with our tail between our legs and our pockets empty. It was a huge failure. And I just sat there thinking I failed. But there's an interesting lesson here, because now looking back on that 25 years later, was that a failure?
No.
Or was
Not at
that
all.
the best possible thing that could have happened to me?
Totally.
And it goes to show not just what happened in that Netflix Blockbuster story, but what failure really means. Can you tell failure in the moment, or are things your fault? Do things fail because of you or in spite of you? It's such an interesting observation, but I got to tell you, it shaped a lot of how I think about things not going well from then on, which was realizing you never know. You never know.
Mark, I have to ask you, when did you first hear the cultural term Netflix and chill?
Is that the most amazing thing?
Yes,
I mean,
it's unreal.
Listen, I'm astounded at the economic success of Netflix, of course. And I'm amazed we're on almost every country in the world. And I'm even more amazed we make our own movies and produce our own TV shows and win Academy Awards. And oh my God, I never saw that coming. But I gotta say, Netflix and chill, that is the most surprising outcome of everything. You kind of know you've made it when you become a meme. And so, I guess I've achieved everything I could. There's my checklist, right? There's my checklist.
Yeah.
And you become a euphemism for getting laid. You know you've done something right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Mark, how did you and Reed come up with the culture for Netflix?
I mentioned early on when you asked about how I met Reed, and I said that we just connected over honesty. And then what a surprise, honesty became a big cultural thing. And that's not coincidental. And it's because culture is not something that's aspirational. Culture is observational. Culture is not what you say. Culture is what you do. And too many people think, oh, we need to have a corporate culture. Let's get in a conference room and a whiteboard and figure out what we want our culture to be. And it doesn't work like that. As any one of us who has children realize, you can say whatever you want, but what your children are doing is watching how you behave, and that becomes what they model after. And that's a long way of answering your question, that the Netflix culture sprang from a couple of things, but probably the most fundamental one was from the way Reed and I behaved, that we were extremely analytical, that we were extremely honest, that we were extremely all about that it was doing the right thing in the long term, not doing short-term hacks. And all those things came from it. But the other thing, which is interesting, is that Netflix has a very unique aspect of the culture, which is called freedom and responsibility, which basically says that people are can do what they want. But they have the responsibility to achieve the things they're supposed to achieve. But they're not prescribed how they get there. And what's interesting is that's a culture which is not unique to Netflix. It's unique to almost every early stage company. Because when you're little, you don't have the resources to have these command and control systems and supervising and knowing what everyone's doing. You have 6 people. You have enough work for 600. And so all you can do is say, okay, Simon, you see that mountain over there? I'll meet you at the top in 2 weeks, and here's what you've got to get done. I'm not going to see you for 2 weeks. Like, okay, Sonia, and I'll be in 2 weeks, but here's what you have to get done. And I trust the two of you are going to figure out through different routes how you're going to get there. I gave you this freedom to solve the problem as you saw fit and to overcome whatever you came into using your own wiles and skills, but I'm counting on you to be there. And because you've handpicked those first 6 people, well, lo and behold, it works. What gets you in trouble is you get a little bit bigger and all of a sudden someone shows up late and the CEO goes, oh, this isn't good. I can't be surprised like this. So, all right, I need status reports. I need everyone to send me a weekly report of what's going on so I don't get surprised. And everyone goes, oh, status reports. Or someone gets there on time, but they had to spend a bit more money than expected. And the CEO goes, oh, can't do this. I need to pre-approve all expenses over $5,000. And little by little, you're eroding this freedom. You're basically saying, I may trust you to have a $10 million monthly sales quota, but I don't trust you well enough to make the decision about whether you should fly business class or coach to see this customer when you have a meeting first thing the next morning. I don't trust you to make a decision about what level hotel to stay in. It's ridiculous. It's treating people like children. And what most companies do as they get bigger is begin building these guardrails for people with bad judgment to protect them from bad judgment. And the Netflix experiment was, what happens if we build a culture for people with good judgment? What if we go, what people with good judgment want is not to have rules. And so there aren't any. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the travel policy at Netflix. So and the vacation policy, there isn't one. And the expense policy, there isn't one. They're all the same. It's all use your best judgment. And it's amazing what effect that has on people's desire to work there because they're treated like adults. They're given agency. They get to not only do they get to have this freedom and responsibility for themselves, they're surrounded by other people who have tremendous judgment. And if you ask, what does someone really want about working someplace? It is not, I want to have snacks all the time and kombucha on tap and a fireman pole and a nap pod. They want agency. They want to be surrounded by capable peers. They want to be given interesting things to do. And that's really what the Netflix cultural experience is. And that came from those very early days of saying, what kind of company do we want to build? And how do we want people to behave? And how are we going to set up an environment that rewards people?
So the key to that, though, would be the hiring process and making sure that that person that you're hiring actually fits inside that culture, because, you know, it might work for 95% of people, but there's those 5% that will abuse that, you know, luxury, I guess, or that, you know. So how do you make sure that when you're hiring, is there a certain question that you are asking the person to find that person that would fit that culture?
Well, we could speak for an hour on just that process, and but I will break it to you. It's not 95% fit, 5% don't. It's closer to the other way around. It's that it's you have to have extremely good judgment to work at a place like Netflix, and you really and it's not 95-5, but it's not that all you're doing is trying to weed out the small number of people who can't work in an atmosphere like that. You're trying to find the smaller people who are exceptionally good and would thrive in an environment like that. But how you find them, it's not a single question. But there is a concept which you probably want to master, which is that you can't know in advance. It's really, really hard. What you have to recognize is I'm going to get it wrong a lot. I'm not going to know how well this person can achieve the things I need them to achieve until I see them actually achieve them, which means that if they're not, you've got to own that mistake and address it. And that means sitting down and having hard conversations with people. And too many companies are scared to do that. I mean, I don't know whether you have these things where you are. Here it's called a PIP, or a performance improvement plan.
Yeah.
When you're not doing well, they sit you down and go, let's talk about a 6-month plan. Oh my God. It is cruel and unusual punishment. It basically is, listen, I know I'm going to fire you in 6 months, and you know you're going to get fired in 6 months. But what we're going to do is make you go through this monkey act of proving to us why you suck and why I document it all. Oh, that is so immoral. So
Yeah, it's horrible.
And so if someone's not working out, you owe it to them to be straight with them, and you own it. You go, listen, I'm as much at fault here as you are. This is not the right, you're skilled, you're talented, you're a great guy. I wouldn't have hired you if you weren't. You're just not a good match for what I need right now. And let me help you find a place that's going to work better for you somewhere else. It's like, if you're unwilling to do that, you risk two horrible things. Everyone else in the department is going to come to either one of two conclusions. Either you're weak or you're stupid. Either you see that this person is not holding up their end and you're too weak to do anything about it, and you're making all the rest of us deal with that person, or you're stupid and you don't see it. And you don't want either of those things to be true. Your job as a manager is to have the right people in the right seats and to give them all the information and context they need to make good decisions. But that get the right people in the right seats is the huge, huge part of your job as a manager. And that requires sometimes saying, I messed up. You are not the right person and we need to make a change. I'm not a bad guy. My obligation, though, is not to that person. My obligation is to the other 15 people who work for me, my job is to surround them with people who they go, oh my God, I can't believe I get to work with these people.
Absolutely.
My job is for my investors to do everything possible. It's not like I'm not like a junior team where everybody plays and everyone gets a trophy. I'm managing a professional team where my job is to have the very, very best players in every position because I want to win.
Mark, there's a moment in your book where you explain Reed coming to speak to you about your performance as a CEO. Can you explain how you got through that and what it did to you, I guess, because it would have been really difficult, I could imagine.
Yeah, and actually it's a perfect follow-on to the story, to what I was just talking about, is that one of the hardest things you ever have to do as an early stage CEO is have that hard conversation with somebody where you have this person who joined you from day one and they worked tirelessly and they worked nights and weekends and did everything you asked. And they were a generalist. They could do anything. But oh my gosh, the company's successful. And I don't need someone who's pretty decent at 20 things. I need someone who's exceptional at one. And you've got to bring this person into your office who has done everything for you and say, you're not the right person for where we're going. And I think a lot of CEOs get that part right. And the part they don't get right is recognize what happens if I'm not the person who is the right person for where the company's going. And I had that experience because, not that I came to it entirely on my own. One day, as I mentioned before, when we started, Reed wasn't working at the company. He was on my board, but he would stop in quite frequently to see how things were going, and we'd talk strategy. And one day he poked his head in the office, goes, Mark, we have to talk. And opens up his laptop and begins laying out some points about my style. He's going, you've done some great things, but I'm also seeing some problems. And I go, Reed, I'm not going to sit here and let you pitch me on how much I suck. And he goes, no. And he closes it. And he goes, what I'm saying is that this company is starting to take off and we have to execute flawlessly. And I'm starting to see some challenges in your leadership. And I thought he was going to fire me because he'd invested money. He had more equity than I did. He was chair of the board. And that's not what it was. What he was saying is he thought he should join the company full time and that he should join as CEO and that I would step over to become president. We'd run the company together. Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting thing to think about because I kind of had this dream about being the CEO of a successful company, as every CEO does. And as I thought about it, I go, this is actually two different dreams. There's the dream of me being the CEO and the dream of the big successful company. And what if making one dream come true requires the other one not being true? And more importantly, that dream of the big successful company, that wasn't just my dream. That was my employees' dream. That was my investors' dream. Maybe it was even my customers' dreams. And it was hard to argue with the fact that having the two of us run it together was a much stronger solution. And it wasn't something I came to immediately. It took a couple of days, took a few bottles of wine, took some time chatting with my wife on the porch late at night. But eventually I said, I think Reed's right. And because we had this honest relationship, I trusted him. He did not have an ulterior motive. He genuinely goes, this is what's right for the company. And I had to agree with him. And he was right. In many ways, it was probably the smartest decision I ever made at Netflix was to make room for Reed to join the company. Because the next bunch of years that we ran the company together, was the Renaissance at Netflix. It's where we came up with so many of the big innovations. It's what formed that culture that I think is one of the more enduring aspects of Netflix success.
Podcasting is in a really exciting space at the moment. We've recently seen that Netflix have moved into the podcasting space pretty heavily. You have your own podcast. We speak to some of the world's greatest minds on this podcast. So there's this real movement around podcasting at the moment. First of all, what do you see? Where's the value in podcasting for you? And then also, what do you think Netflix are doing with their move into podcasting?
I'll answer the second part first, because I have no idea. I haven't worked at about Netflix's podcast. I haven't worked at Netflix for quite a long time. I'm just not fluent on their strategies. And more importantly, I've turned out to be a terrible predictor of what Netflix is going to do or why.
Mm-hmm.
Someone would say, are they going to ever have advertising? I go, never will they have advertising. And now, of course, they have.
Yeah.
Are they going to ever do merchandise? No, they're never going to get distracted by merchandise. Now, of course, they have merchandise. So I have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
I just gather it's the idea. It's more content for more people, and that's their idea.
Yep.
Make people happy. I mean, for me, the thing I loved about podcast, and I paused my podcast. But what I loved about podcasting was I was having all these interesting conversations with people anyway. I mean, I've been mentoring early stage entrepreneurs for years, and I'd finish the conversation and go, gosh, that was fascinating. But wow, there's about 6 or 7 other people who would have really loved to have heard that.
Yes.
And that was the genesis for it, was like, well, let's let people listen in on my mentoring sessions. And I did that for a long time, and people got a lot out of it. And I think that's the value, is that the best podcasts allow people to talk. They're unrehearsed. If there's a chemistry or people are asking interesting questions, and not even having it be an interview, but having it be a conversation, that's a format that you don't really see other places. And there's something immersive about a podcast that I find fascinating. I think it's amazing. I'm not surprised that it's become as ubiquitous as it is. It's a powerful thing. So I applaud the fact that you guys are doing it and doing it so well.
Mark, I have to ask you, how did you guys come up with the name Netflix? Because sometimes people get bogged down in that when they're starting a business. They've got to come up with this epic name.
Yeah, well, we were hoping to have an epic name too. But as everyone knows, it's brutally hard to find a good name. I mean, not only ideally is your name evocative of what you do, that would be a plus, but it's got to be something people can spell. You've got to get the domain for it, not just in the .com, but in a whole bunch of others. You got to get a trademark. You've got to get something which just doesn't mean something obscene and Estonian. It's really hard, and we had the same challenge. And our methodology was that we had on a whiteboard, and we have 2 columns, and one column was names evocative of movies, cine and movie and film, and the other was names evocative of the internet, net and whatever, web. And we just began trying to combine them in all kinds of combinations. And then I would go and sit and type away, screening to see whether the domain names were available or whether someone else had registered a trademark or et cetera. And boy, it was really hard. And Netflix was one of the names, but none of us liked Netflix. This was, again, this is at this point, this is probably 1997. And back in 1997, I don't know whether this was the case in Sydney or in Australia in general, but the nickname or the name people sometimes call a pornographic movie was a skin flick. People call them a skin flick or skin flicks. And we're going, oh, and Netflix. That sounds like we just do pornos and that and that big X at the end. That does not help the matter either.
Yeah.
And so, but we kept on going through names and we couldn't find anything else we liked. And so eventually, at least by process of elimination, it sounded a little porny, but Netflix, it was.
Well, it worked.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Marc, you're a creative and a problem solver. What are you trying to solve right now in your life?
The one that I'm actually trying to solve personally is that I've been, perfect way to bring this full circle. We started out by talking about what my mission is in life, my purpose, and it's really helping people hopefully have some of the same opportunities as an entrepreneur than I did, to help give them the tricks and tips and skills to take that idea and get it out of their head and make it real. And there's a huge gap. There's like right now, you're really, really generous in giving me an hour of time with your audience. In my podcast, I'd get an hour or half an hour, 40 minutes, with every week with people. The book, I got 16 hours with 1 million people in my speeches. But those are all these superficial touches. You move them a little bit. With the mentoring, which takes years, I move them a lot. But you can only move a handful at a time. And what I'm trying to do is find that middle ground. How do I do mentorship at scale? How do I not just superficially talk about this, but how do I really, really help people, but do it at scale? And I've got some ideas. So watch this space, and hopefully I'll be announcing something not too far in the future.
Oh,
Very
amazing.
exciting.
Yeah. Marc, we like to end our episodes with our guests sharing an object that is important to them. Is there an object that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, it's fairly trite, but it's one of these. There's not too many objects that I am never without. And every morning, one of these, and this is probably out of my 600th box of this model, this pen. And I've been doing this for 35, 40 years. There is something about writing longhand, which is tremendously good for the thought process. And almost everything I do starts out longhand, whether it starts out in I also carry these 3x5 cards. I'm sitting here in front of my camera with one of these. Writing is instrumental. And one last thing about this is obviously we're in a world of AI. AI used to be a craft that everyone had to learn purely to get their thoughts across. And now, of course, you can babble into a microphone and AI is going to get your thought across. It's incredibly powerful. But there will always be a space for a craftsman, which is someone who has learned how to take it that step further. And it's such an important skill that I never will abandon that. I think writing is an incredibly powerful way for us to get our thoughts across. And this is the symbol of that.
Marc, if someone has made it this far into the episode, they've loved every single word of what you have had to say. Is there something that you want to say to that person?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've talked about a lot of higher level entrepreneurial concepts, but fundamentally, the single biggest key is being willing to do something without knowing in advance if it's going to work and starting small. So, if you have an idea, do something about it. I've heard every excuse and they're all invalid. If you have something you want to try, the clever thing to do is figure out a quick and easy way and try it. And that every single successful entrepreneur you'll ever meet, every single big successful entrepreneur that Sonia and Simon have interviewed, all started the exact same way, by starting.
Absolutely.
Marc, we are so grateful first of all, for emailing us directly and booking your time in directly with us.
Yeah.
That's blown us away. We keep talking about that. And thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Our community loves
Marc.
it.
It's a complete pleasure, and I'm always happy to help.